I will just say I am Debbie Salas, Executive Director of the Cyber Guild. I work with Teresa, who's a co-chair of the Cyber Guild. I'm based here in Alexandria, Northern Virginia. You're very welcome to our virtual employer roundtable. We just started this series in September, and it's designed to make life easy for employers to connect at a reasonably sociable time with thought leaders and subject matter experts on lots of different aspects of building inclusive workspaces. So we will be doing these at least quarterly, although we probably will have content through most of Q1 2025. So just to say, if anyone wants to co-host or guest speak or sponsor one of these roundtables, just please get in touch directly with me. So I'm going to hand it over to Meghan to introduce herself, and then Chuck, and then we'll get going.
Thanks, Debbie. So my name is Meghan Maneval. I know I met some of you previously, but I am an AI and risk strategist currently studying in a doctoral program where I'm studying the impact of AI on inclusivity and in particular neurodiversity. And so really cool to hear about like the HR side of it. We'll talk a little bit about that, but also from the AI side about it, how you can use certain controls and mechanisms to make sure that you don't impact that neurodiversity or inclusivity. So really excited to be here to talk with y'all about that. So Chuck.
Great. Yeah, hi, I'm Chuck Brooks. It's terrific to be here. I teach at Georgetown University in the Cybersecurity Risk Management program, and I actually have a course on disruptive technologies focusing on AI. And I just wrote a book actually called Inside Cyber, How AI, Quantum, IoT, and 5G will impact our privacy and security and also our bias. So I'm looking forward to participating in this event.
Great, thank you both. So over to Meghan, you're going to drive some slide presentations, and I'll just monitor the screen. Thanks, Meghan.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we got that one up. Perfect. But like I just mentioned, I think everybody's kind of aware, we're going to talk a little about a couple of different areas, but I'm going to start showcasing a little bit upfront about my research that I've started to do. Now, I am still in the doctoral program, so none of this is finalized or published, but I just want to talk a little bit about what I've been finding, because I think it's really timely and eye-opening to a lot of folks. Then we're going to talk about when good AI goes bad, and we really encourage you all to add comments in the chat, or we'll take yourself off mute if you have stories and things like that. And then we'll give you some takeaways at the end to go home and back into your lives with. So we'll go ahead and start with a little bit, like I mentioned, about my research. So it is a doctoral study program, and it is what they call a practical study. So it's not necessarily looking at theory, it's looking at practice. And so the first thing I started looking at, of course, is inclusivity in the workplace. And I think all of us here really recognize the benefits that DE&I have. They've certainly gained a lot of recognition over the last couple of years. And neurodiversity in particular has really gained attention, I think, in terms of when remote work started, because we realized that neurodiverse people have really unique perspectives, different skills, things like problem solving, innovation, things like that. And they're bringing a lot of benefits to that workplace. And so when we talk about supporting neurodiverse employees, it's not just about equity, although, of course, that is important. But really what it's about is that strategic advantage that can drive that creativity and resilience of teams. I say it often that the best way to improve your cybersecurity is to improve diversity. Diverse minds, different ways of thinking, different ways of problem solving is a huge, huge strategic advantage. And so we start to see this as more and more organizations start to prioritize it. One of the things that we found is that there aren't really a lot of standard ways of being inclusive. A lot of times companies kind of, I'm not going to say they make it up, but they make processes that work for them. And it's becoming a really long-term success strategy where they're coming up with a lot of creative ways to address that. And sometimes, that might require new policies, that might require new practices, things like that. So really looking at those inclusive practices and policies has become critical. Excuse me. Now, what's interesting about this is as I started researching this in my program, most of the current research about AI, which is where I started, ironically, I didn't even start with the inclusivity side. I started with AI. And a lot of the research is focused on the general benefits and the risks within the workplace. And what I found was that it really didn't dive too much into the unique, like I'm going to call them needs and experiences, right, of the users. And so, for example, one of the things we talk about with neurodiverse employees is facing challenges like communication barriers, or even sometimes like sensory overload, things like that. And there's ways that AI technology can help people like that. Absolutely. I'm using AI right now to help generate closed captions because I have an auditory processing disorder. So when other people are talking, I need to read captions. That's an AI use that can be fantastic for that, right? However, there's also a problem because sometimes those captions will cover what's on the screen and then I can't see the slide. So that's a way where AI can be used as an accommodation, but is a great idea, right? But then there's also some of those challenges. Now that's a minor one. I can move the box, but sometimes those challenges can actually exacerbate barriers that were put in place in the first place. So that's why really my doctoral research is looking to address those gaps, because I think what we'll find is there's probably some insights that we can get from either neurodiverse people directly or folks who work with them, occupational therapists, things like that, where we can look at what some of those challenges are and then help build that equitable workplace through AI and making sure that that AI stays ethical over time. By the way, I've reported that to Zoom, and they are actually looking into it because you can move the box, so it does help. In case anybody was wondering there. So shifting a little bit then to the technical side of it. So the NIST AI risk management framework, this is one of my faves. It specifically highlights the AI's potential harm on people. So you'll notice here there's 3 boxes. A lot of times when we think about AI and we're testing certain controls, we're focused more on data or the organization or the technical ecosystem that it's in. So that's why I really like the NIST one, because it focuses in here on the people. And you'll notice there's some, this is actually a snapshot right from NIST because I didn't want to misquote them. But really when you're looking at like, if AI, for example, isn't designed with that diversity in mind, it's going to start perpetuating some of those unintentional bias. Like we mentioned, may deepen some of those inequities. But also I really like that they call out physical and psychological safety of the employee, because that's also something that can deteriorate depending on how technology is designed and deployed there. So something definitely to keep in mind with that. And the other thing too is when this comes a lot into play when we talk about like AI systems that are used especially for HR or hiring or promotions, things like that. If those become biased, they can actually limit access to economic advancements, access to promotions, and actually further marginalize underrepresented groups. So AI disenfranchisement, excuse me, that's a hard word to pronounce there. Very real risk. And that's really why it comes into play that AI has to be very intentionally designed to be inclusive. Otherwise, it could be inadvertently exclusive to people in certain populations. So that's really, it's not like a inclusive by default. You have to be very intentional when we're looking at these things. But luckily, NIST has some great examples here as well. So these are a couple ways that we look at when we want to talk about mitigating some of those risks. So it's looking at things like, and it's interesting because before I started researching AI, in my mind, I was like, secure, it's safe. Those things might be interchangeably. And then you see this and you're like, ooh, I've used all of those words interchangeably. And they're not, they're very real, different things, and they require real and different tests, which I think is the big thing. So if we're talking about like validity and reliability, that's the base that you're going to have here. And that's ensuring that AI systems are accurate and dependable. But that's very different than safety and security, which talks about making sure that it remains functional, right? That's very different than accountable and transparent, which means you have to be, enable responsible decision making that's visible, that's explainable, right? All of those things mean very different things. And so when you're designing AI, you have to design controls and mechanisms that'll ensure that these things actually happen. The big one there being as well as privacy enhancing. So that's making sure that people's rights are upheld. And fairness, right? Fairness in AI decisions is very, very key there. So keeping these in mind as you're designing AI or deploying AI, because it's not just about the company that builds it. If you're an HR department or you're an employer and you're deploying a tool that uses AI, you also want to consider these things. And you're going to want to ask that vendor how they address these things as well. And that's really how we're going to start to see AI. Like I mentioned, it's not inclusive by default. It really has to be intentional in how we design some of these things. So that's just a little sneak peek into my research. It's actually been really cool to start to see some of the case studies that are out there, some of the experts that I've been speaking with and interviewing who have had cases where, which we'll talk about it in a minute, where that good AI goes bad. And so, at this point, I'm gonna, Chuck, I'm gonna turn it over to you to talk a little bit about this, because I think for many of us, we've probably seen some of these examples. So why don't we go ahead and toss it over to you and tell me a little bit about where we're seeing some of these challenges in cybersecurity.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think when you're going into the whole issue of bias, which is really important when you talk about AI, it's really not a surprise that the bias is there. If you look at the ecosystem of programmers and the people that work in IT, it's heavily male, and so their biases are inherent, and so that has really caused a lot of issues. So the diversity aspect is really important, and you'll see that you need it through the whole life cycle, from the ideation, the design, the development, and the deployment. So that's really critical to have it. And really, what you're talking about is automation. It's machine learning. And when you employ AI, you have an issue of what is in the algorithms. And so the algorithms are going to determine the outcome. And so your data needs to really be diverse. It needs to be scrubbed to see that it's accurate data and that it's preconditioned. So you get the right outcomes. And then you have to look at the industry and say, if you're looking at employment, obviously there are triggers and words that are necessary to identify what resumes or CVs they may pull. And you got to make sure that it is gender neutral. And that's been a problem so far in a lot of the human resources areas, because they're relying on what already is, and not what is going to be. And so I think, I've seen a big change. We're talking about cybersecurity and diversity. I can speak from my own practical experience with my course. I've been teaching now for actually 9 years, 2 years at Johns Hopkins and 7 years at Georgetown. And in my early classes, there was virtually zero women. And now in many of my classes, it's 30 to 40% women. So I think a lot of this deals with education. And part of the problem has been really communicating about what cybersecurity is. People think of it sitting there on a computer, lonely, just writing programs and coding, but it really is developing a lot of soft skills. It's communication skills. It's knowing a lot of the areas, because cybersecurity deals with everything from hardware to software to resilience to reputation. There's so much involved in this, and of course moving to the cloud. And then you're talking about now what we're talking about today, these emerging technologies. So I think it's a new opportunity for a lot of people, because we're really meshing these technologies, primarily artificial intelligence right now, which is really in its early stages of generative AI, but it's been around for many years, and how to direct it. And as you spoke about, there are guardrails, but really the best way to have guardrails is to ensure that there's a lot of diversity of thought and transparency. And we're starting to see that more because it's a gap, it's a weakness when you have one viewpoint in there in anything. It makes it weak, because you're going to get outsmarted, whether it be in cybersecurity or whether it be in any kind of industry. So I think that's really important. And so really it comes down to now is how we deal with the strategy of the integration of cybersecurity tools in how we hire and use people, and what it's going to do. And it is already doing right now. It's primarily in threat intelligence. And it's been taking people that could use these tools, automate it, and know how to value them. And so I think this is something of interest, because really we're looking at a new era. It's a fourth industrial revolution where we're meshing the physical and the digital. And I think it's an opportunity, because I think particularly in colleges, there's more women than men. There's a lot more now pursuing graduate degrees. And I think it's, be able to get over the hurdles where in the past, when in a lot of the more physically oriented industries and products, everything now is connected digitally. And to develop an expertise in that and have an understanding of the whole ecosystem, the soft, the hard, the technical skills all of that really enables people. And I think we're seeing a movement towards that. And I think it starts with education. That's why I'm heavily involved in teaching and evangelical speaking about cybersecurity to everybody, because it's not only artificial intelligence that is difficult for people to understand. It's also cybersecurity. We built it the same way, without any rules, without security in mind, and so we're catching up. So I think, as we replace a lot of our legacy systems and move ahead and design things, I think it's going to take a lot of creative minds, and I think it's going to take a lot of diverse minds. So I'm excited about the future that way. And I think that there'll be a lot of opportunities. And I think the key thing is alerting people to these opportunities. And that's why uh, the Alliance and all these people involved with it, the Cyber Guild, are really important to communicate these opportunities and educate people on the pathways to get involved. So cybersecurity, AI is a tool, and just like anything else, these tools have to be designed, regulated, monitored, and developed. And I think that's a great opportunity for new people to get into this world. And I'm hoping that beyond STEM, which has been somewhat helpful, that it expands exponentially with seminars like this and continuing education.
It's interesting. Chuck, you mentioned that I was at a presentation previously. They were talked about when COVID happened and we had this like rapid, everybody has to move remote, right? And so we did what probably would have taken 3 years in like 3 weeks, right? Of just getting people home. And a lot of times it was, execute first, worry about security later. What I like is that we learned from that. And now when we're doing this new digital transformation with AI, people are like, hang on, and they are thinking about security ahead. And so I think it's a trend that I've noticed. So I don't know if you've seen that as well, but I love
I've
how
seen
you
a lot
said
of,
that,
yeah,
right?
I think you're
Yeah,
right. I think it accelerated us into that world, and it made us take our own responsibility for our own actions more than relying on the administrators to cover everything. And we learned. And you're
yeah.
right. I think we all benefit from that. And we're really in that world of connectivity right now that is really changing everything. So we're at the early stages of change, and I think it's important to continue to understand where it's going.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You touched on this as well, and the bias, and I got a couple of examples up here. But want to talk to us a little bit about, like, I mean, this is specific to recruitment software, but it could be anything, right? When we're
Right.
talking about bias here.
Yeah, no, I mean, the bias is, again, it goes back to the people that are developing the code and going through the whole design of it. And you've seen institutes, like MIT and stuff, develop stuff that is heavily biased because most of the people doing the engineering were men, and we're discovering it. It's also gone off the rails a few times too, where it's become violent. So I think this really illustrates the fact that you really need to expand the diversity in the early stages and throughout the life cycle of any kind of software development. And also, there's now a variety of tools that we can use to help accelerate that and monitor it. I'll just mention them and I'll make them available later. But I did some research, and pretty much all the biggies, big tech companies have something. IBM has a AI Fairness 360, a toolkit that provides tools for bias mitigation and including identifying bias and training data and AI models. And Google has a fairness indicators. It's a tool where it can be used to identify bias and training also, and provides metrics that can be used to measure bias. And then you have Microsoft, of course, which is something called FairLearn, which is a Python library that provides a number of fairness-aware machine learning algorithms. So, and there's many more, but there's Google has also a what if tool that allows users to explore how different inputs affect the predictions of machine learning models. So I think this is a good start, because when you have the big tech companies looking at this, they're the first integrators of all this, and usually we all follow. I mean, so the fact that they're doing it is a good sign that the bias issue is being recognized and in some ways mitigated. But again, unless you attract people into the world of actually doing the coding and design and development and deployment of these programs, you're still going to have bias. So I think it's still an imperative to get more women in the workplace and in cybersecurity and in anything to do with AI.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, isn't, you bring up a really great point. You said it earlier and you said it again here of like it's not just about, I think sometimes when people think about bias, and these examples are great, it's the data that it was trained on, right? But the code and the algorithms and like shift left, right? And the bias starts even sooner than that too, with the developers, like you were saying. Um, the Amazon one I think is interesting, and I apologize. There was a participant who said they worked in HR, and your name is escaping me. But this one with Amazon is interesting. If you haven't heard of this example, where they were using, and then Chuck, you brought it up, right? Male dominated industry. They had male dominated profiles in their candidate system as acceptable, right? Because in the past, they hired mostly men. So the system learned that these male resumes were the good resumes. And then they'd have a resume that would have something related to like a female college or a female honor society, and it would kick it out as bad because it had never seen it before. And so that's just, one example, but it's interesting, some of those things we're seeing nowadays.
Yeah, particularly in human resources because it involves so much now automation. In the past, it used to be you had to write a letter and a cover letter and get a response, but now you can apply to thousands of jobs through LinkedIn and Indeed and many others. And so the recruiters and the human resources people rely on these programs now. And so if they have inherent bias, there's a problem. And it's not just the bias of gender; they have bias of code words and everything and experience. So you really have to almost learn what the human resources program is to get in through the door there. I mean, it's basically keeping people out. And so I think it really starts with making sure that these human resources departments have understanding of fairness rules and transparency before they put the positions out and what they're using for automation to basically block some of these CVs and resumes coming in.
Yeah, yeah. And then even once you get through that level of AI and automation, these next two here about Epic and the Pymetrics actually were interesting. I hadn't heard about this, but the in some cases they can use like an AI analysis to look at facial expressions, and interpret body behavior, body language. And for folks, who are neurodiverse or who maybe don't have, the same neurotypical reactions, again, the AI could say, oh, this candidate didn't do so well in this interview, or they failed some sort of emotional intelligence test, things like that. There's so many things that the more layers you peel back, it's like, oh yeah, that's why, like when you said, like you really have to start right from, that the people who are developing the tool, where they're coming from to address some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we're really losing, our privacy, the surveillance, world of digital when you're monitoring your reactions and then you have an algorithm determining, like what you just said. It's problematic. It's particularly, I think, problematic for jobs because it can miss context. AI is machine learning. It's based on patterns, not on real human emotions. So and so I think it creates another problem. So if I were a human resources department or I'm recruiting, I would say past that first level, it should all be human because you cannot really base someone's personality on using an algorithm and AI and determining it. You may be for intelligence purposes another thing but not for when you're hiring for a job. There's so much more involved, and I think it would be smart for most human resources to, after they do the initial screening, to make sure that there are always humans involved.
Yeah, the human in the loop, right?
Human in the loop,
That's the
yeah.
expression there. So, well, I want to open it up a little bit too. There's a couple folks that you can either tell us in chat, or if you want to, take yourself off mute and share. But of course, we've just talked about some negative situations with AI. But certainly, there's been some good ones as well that have helped. One of the ones I mentioned, obviously here, is like closed captions. That's a really great one that helps, for me, especially with being included in meetings. A lot of times when you get more than, let's say, 9 or 12, people on that screen, and the boxes get little and little and little, and I rely on reading lips. And so now I can't see that person's lips. So when COVID first started, it was kind of difficult to work remotely, and to wear masks, frankly, because I couldn't read people's lips. But that's an example of things where there were these accommodations that were put in place, in terms of AI, Chuck, I want to share another example where you've seen AI used in the workplace to aid with some inclusivity, and then anybody else want to share as well?
Yeah, it's more, it's not necessarily inclusivity, but from my cybersecurity perspective,
Yeah.
it's played a amazing role in threat detection because one of the big problems with for security operations centers and people working in cybersecurity is they get a lot of false positives. So it's able to help synthesize through that and also integrate a lot of threat detection software because it's so asymmetrical where the bad guys have an option, and also been able to recognize phishing attacks and gaps and stuff like that. And more important, I think this applies to every industry. It's helps. It's an enabler. It's a tool to help reports because that can be a cumbersome thing when you have to spend hours doing something, which could take 20 minutes if you use an AI tool. And you're seeing this pretty much in every industry now. Even some industries have their own AI where they allow employees to help write memos and do whatever they need to do as long as they can control the data, I think. But so I think it's there. So I think there's a lot of value, and probably in healthcare is one of the biggest industries I think which impacted because it's allowed for a lot of new drug discovery, comparing symptoms and doing speeding up a lot of the ergonomics of healthcare. So I think almost every industry you could think of has benefited from it. I think for inclusivity, I think it's still a challenge because we need to again span the people that are span the network of people that are involved in creating the AI itself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it is interesting too, you mentioned a couple of different spaces in terms of, the outcomes and, like patients or, medical decisions or, even like lending decisions and things like that if you're going to get a loan. A lot of that stuff has always relied on that. But it's interesting to see some of like now the new use cases, where we're leveraging some of that. I've seen some examples where they've used AI for I joke it's like your personal assistant, and it's hey, here's the 25 things I have to get done this week. Create a schedule for me, or help me delegate some of these things. And that's one where I find it's so simple, if you will, but thinking about the cognitive load it would take to look at that list, prioritize that list, figure out when I'm going to do these things. You know what I mean? And so there's just a lot of ways that we're reducing some of the stress there, or and different things like that, where AI is definitely helpful for folks in that sense as well.
Yeah. Even when you're planning your travel now, you can ask, where, how do I, what's the schedule? What are the best airfares? What get me in time? Where should it stay according to
Yeah.
your preferences? So I think, there's a lot of what are called intelligent agents that go out now and cultivate a lot of that information. And so I think that's really augmenting the human in a lot of industries. So you're going to see more and more of that. I think that's what's coming next is most of that agentic kind of benefits, as AI
Yeah.
develops it. So it's really not, general intelligence, but really augmenting human capabilities for what you kind of things you just said, that the tasks we need to do that we don't have time to do.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of it, the augmentation. I've actually, and I'm big on, I'm teaching my kids, they're going to hear about it. They're going to want to use it. So I'm teaching them how to use it the right way. And so like one of the things is my daughter is a Girl Scout. She's working on her silver award. And one of the things was she was working on the proposal and she's trying to like wordsmith it a little ways. And I was like, well, let me show you how like you can, you know what I mean? And so we put it in and I said, what are you trying to get across? And she put in like a bunch of like her thoughts and it crafted it for her. And she was like, oh, and I was like, yeah. So now like you can kind of see there's ways you can do it to make your life a little bit easier as well. I taught one of my kids too, if you have a rubric for the assignment and you have the assignment, ask AI to look at the rubric and tell you how close you are. Like there's things like that where it's not just in the workplace, it's in our lives as well. So.
I mean, you're right. And you're just looking at it. Probably the place that's going to impact first and most is education because
Yep.
it's an enabler, is just what you
Yeah.
said, doing research, writing, discovery. And we didn't have those tools available just a couple decades ago. So, but now
Yeah.
they're so refined and done well that you really can become an expert or develop an expertise much quicker than you don't have to go to the library and check out books. So it's
Oh yeah.
a different world. It's interesting. I
Yeah.
went to my undergraduate library to visit, and I hadn't been there in many years. And I went in the library and there were no books. It was all digital in my college. So I mean, I think it's really changing fast, and I think that the world they're going to be living in, your daughter is in 20 years from now is going to be so much different, and I think they're going to have more capability than we ever had. The question here is again, the guardrails and how to make sure
Yeah.
that privacy and surveillance and our ability to do the right thing is not, overtaken by
Yeah.
by the people that run it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It looks Jen here put a comment in there about closed captionings for videos and live streams. Live streams are big too, especially because you not necessarily can't go back and rewatch it or back it up. Sometimes if you're watching a video, pause it. What did they say? Back up. So that's a great point as well. I actually saw too, Chuck, you mentioned about that. We used it of uh, I was staying at one hotel and a friend was staying at another, and we were kind of in this general area and we wanted to meet for dinner. So we were like, hey, what are some, like restaurants within this kind of range in this sort of, whatever. And it just makes finding that information so much faster. But then you have to figure out like, all right, but is this accurate? Like,
Yeah.
is this restaurant really open? Things like that. Did is the pricing still there? Do they change their menu? Like all that type of stuff just becomes questions that that's a micro scale. It opens it up a lot bigger as well. So
Oh no, it's great. I mean, you can think about anything in hospitality. I mean, where you want to get,
yeah.
if you're planning a wedding, you automatically you have your own wedding planner. But there's
Where
so
was
much
AI
to
when I was planning my wedding? Come on now.
it. But I also
Yeah.
see some downsides. I mean, again, with the younger generation, the kids growing up, there is some value to being able to do stuff by yourself, and
Yes.
to think and be creative and have imagination. Einstein said imagination is really intelligence. So I think it takes away a lot of the requirements to think about things yourself. And
Yeah.
so it may change our society in bad for that part, when we have a lot of people basically just being repetitive of what they pull up on the computer. So I think, there's always going to be room for creativity. And even you're seeing that now with a lot of the artists, the writers in Hollywood and television and stuff like that. They're worried about AI replacing them for a lot of the shows. And there really is, and music too. I think that's a danger. And I think we have to get that up front and taken care of because it can't replace a human. We're not even close in terms of the brain
Yeah.
power. Yeah, and until quantum comes along, but
Yeah.
we're we need to discuss these things now, and it's not just really regulation; it's really discussing the implications and of what AI will be, like we're doing right now with inclusivity, but it really impacts everything we're doing.
So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a question in the chat from Teresa, and then Daniel raised his hand. So do you want to check out the question in the chat, and then we'll go to Daniel?
Yeah, I didn't see Daniel raise his hand. Apologies. I did see the question. Teresa here asked, great discussion. What do you think the government needs to do to provide guardrails? Great question. I'll start with saying I do think the NIST AI risk management framework is a good start. I think it was first, out the gate type thing. But it's definitely not the end. So Chuck, I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, no, first of all, I'm a big fan of NIST. I think some of their frameworks are great, particularly for industry and for, areas, because it does provide a risk management strategy for someone. The government gets a little iffy, because I'm just looking from cybersecurity, that they don't really, we're being attacked by state actors right now, and a lot of the people being attacked by these state actors are in private sector, and they don't have the capabilities to defend it. And I'm worried now that it's gone too asymmetrical or too much at risk there. So, but you also don't want to give the government too much power over it. So it's always a balancing act. But I think CISA was just created a few years ago, and for protecting, particularly for critical infrastructure. But I think we have to look at, there's the Europeans have put through a AI doctrine, and so we put a general one out originally. The White House did, but I think it's too early, and it doesn't. It really just speaks in generalities, and so probably we're going to have to do what more Europe did with GDPR, is put some punitive roles on some of the players, so they don't take advantage of it. I see problem with coming already with deep fakes, exploitation, all these things that are negative. Unfortunately, when you're talking about technology, there's always two sides to it, and the bad guys seem to take advantage of it quicker. And they have with cyber, and they're doing it also with all these illicit, horrible areas on the dark web right now. So I think the government needs to get involved, and particularly with violence and trafficking and things like that, drugs. That's where they should have almost unlimited, I think, capabilities and investment in. But our own privacy is a whole big issue, that's one I think could take 15 programs to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel, you had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead and share?
Oh yeah, no, just a little bit of the kind of the same. One of the things that I'm seeing is making sure that the output of any AI system application or use, from my perspective as a CPA, it's always trust, but we need to verify, right? And I think that's what we're all talking about here, along the lines of risk management, along the lines of cybersecurity controls. And then one of the things that I'm looking at and working with a company right now, we're talking about figuring out the results. And I think we've been saying that inclusivity, but also and I think you mentioned it, Megan, with the lending, banks need to verify and confirm and prove that if they're using AI to either approve a loan or not, of who that is, and they're not able to do that, they're going to be in trouble. And then on the flip side, with insurance companies too. So for example, State Farm, Allstate, if they're using AI to figure out who they should accept, how much they're going to charge, and then you go into then the credit reporting agencies, if they're using AI, they're going to have to be able to transparently prove how they came to those results. And if they can't, that's where the guardrails, that's where NIST will come in, or the ISO 42001. You need to be able to verify and say, yes, this is the results, and we know because we tested it, or something like that. There has to be some verification to prove those results of AI. Otherwise, we're all just running around and hopefully assuming that what AI spits out is complete and accurate.
Yeah, more so than traditional software. I think that's the biggest thing. Like if I made this PowerPoint or this Google slide deck. I know that when I type the letters on my keyboard, the word's going to come up there. You don't have to prove that to me, right? Like that happens. That's traditional software. But to your point, right? If that AI is making a decision somewhere between the human and the output, or the input and the output, we need to know what that is, and that's the biggest gap there, I think. So.
And there's another cyber threat now. It's relatively new. It's poisoning the data.
Yes.
Hackers and hacktivists, they can put stuff in there that's false to deliberately throw off your whole AI. And it's done in intelligence for sure, but basically these people are nefarious, and they go after where there's money, and it can link it with ransomware and other things too. So I think the cybersecurity element, it sort of permeates through everything we're doing right now. And insurance is a tough area because it's always the insurance that are looking for their benefit, their revenue benefit. And even with cybersecurity, they're really not insuring the right threats, and it may be deliberate. So how do you how do you really determine and regulate who gets insured and how, and what the data is accurate? So that's a new area of insurance, but it hasn't taken off the way it should have, and I think that's because there's not really a big oversight over it.
Right.
Well, I think we'll pivot a little bit to the takeaways, because actually the question that came in was a little bit of one of the takeaways. So the question was that you mentioned more about diversity in people who are creating the AI systems. Have you seen much motion in that movement there, in terms of bringing in more diversity into cybersecurity and development side of things, Chuck?
I've seen some, not enough, but yeah, the fact that it's being discussed and done is good, and it really also goes to places like Carnegie Mellon, MIT, and other places that are leading these areas of software development. So I think, and that's where I think it needs to make its initial presence, because a lot of that's adopted, and also obviously with the tech companies. But I think the tech companies have recognized, as I said, some of these tools are offering now, that they're trying to make an effort to do that. So I think that the answer is yes, but it's a slow yes, and so I think there needs to be more done.
It's interesting, the statistic you mentioned earlier. So I went to my undergrad is in technology. I went to a technology institution, and at the time it was 18% female. And you said about 30% in your class, which I think is pretty good. But I was reading in our alumni magazine that it's less than 30. I want to say it was like 26 or 28. And my mind went, how in that amount of time did it only go from like 18, to 20? And I'm not going to say how long that time was and age myself, but it just doesn't seem like it's moving that much. Like how to shift that needle. And that's the hard part, is trying to figure out how to get sooner, get earlier. And I'll bring up the Girl Scouts again. I'm a big fan of the Girl Scouts, but they did a program as well. And since my girls were brownies, that's like second, third grade, I got a picture of them, which the computer open up on a table and they're pulling out RAM and they're looking at this stuff just to kind of understand, but yeah, I just think that's so interesting, that shift. It's like not close enough kind of a thing.
Yeah, you're right. It has to start really early in elementary school. I mean, all these mythologies like boys are good at math are all false. The person that designed our whole Apollo program did it on paper, and she did it. For all the algorithms. So there's never been evidence of that. It's just really just these creations that were taken as for granted. But I think that needs to be changed there. But I think there's also an opportunity to do a lot of cross training now in the workplace, particularly in government and industry. And I know to offer more diversity in those cross training in technology and cyber. And I think also technology, because it's new or changing. A lot of it's not new, but it's because it's changing so rapidly, particularly AI. I think it's going to attract more people, hopefully. But you're right about the stats aren't going up that much, and I think it's because there are people coming out of college, and mine's graduate school courses, and a lot of people that come to my course are also out of government, so their companies are paying for it sometimes to go in. But I think it's just so much more needs to be done. It really needs a STEM times 10 to really sort of balance things.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you want to add in terms of takeaways? I know Debbie is going to come back on in a few minutes and talk a little bit about a couple other things, but anything else from you, Chuck, or anybody else on the call want to share as we're kind of wrapping up today?
I just say I really like your slides that you prepared, and I'm eager to see your PhD thesis. I think you're ready, so that's great.
Yeah, it's this semester now, what they call the fall semester is preparing all of like the prospectus to go to the Institutional Review Board. So keep your fingers crossed that we're going through, but it's a lot of revisions right now. And I think that is the hardest part for me, is I feel like I've written the same thing so many times.
Yeah.
So we shall see. But
and
but I
also
appreciate your support.
academic writing is different than other writing, so it takes a little different perspective to write this stuff.
I think I told my husband when I first started, or at some point early, I said, when I write in like my professional life, I write because I know that it's true and people like believe me because it's true. When you write academically, you have to like prove that it's true. I told my husband, I'm like, that's the hardest thing, is proving that this is the right part. So
you're right. It's a whole different
perspective.
world.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
All right. Well, Debbie, did you want to talk a little bit more about the upcoming events and the rest of the roundtables here?
Yes, only to share with everyone that you can get involved and spread the word. You will receive the video of today, so you'll have it for the record. This is our second virtual roundtable, and we did this to make it easy for employers and people connected with employment to share stories, but more importantly, to get motivated with actionable strategies to take back to their workplace. So if you have a subject that is aligned to our purpose and mission in the Cyber Guild and want to host or co-host a future roundtable, I'm taking requests now for 2025. Or you may know someone who wants to help make sure that this is sustainable and sponsor a session and brand a session as a subject matter expert. So you'll get this slide. There's lots of ways to get involved. And we already have people signed up for January, and now also we've added a date in for February. So let us know if there's something you want to talk about. But as importantly, and you can stick it in the chat now or send me an email after, what would you like to hear and talk about in 2025 that we should consider in our content schedule? So really want to make sure that this is easy, but also practical and helpful. So is there anything that you really want us to put on the calendar for next year? If you want to stick anything in the chat now, or please send me an email. And then just finally, The next slide is only to give a shout out that we launched our inclusive mentoring program last month. It's a soft launch. It's a pilot for 2025. There is information on LinkedIn and on our website. We're just about to close the applications this week. But if you want more information on that, either to be a mentor or a protege is a Cyber Guild mentee, then connect with me directly, please. I think I've covered everything I needed to say, Megan. Did I miss anything?
I think that's everything. Yeah, I think we're good.
So anything in the chat in terms of content for next year, but we want to make sure we're bringing content and conversations that are most helpful to build inclusive workspaces within cybersecurity. So please reach out to me separately. And indeed, Ariana is a fellow researcher, Megan. Ariana at Virginia Tech is on this roundtable, and Ariana is going to be hosting a roundtable in January talking about the role of reverse career fairs and work that she's doing at Virginia Tech. So we'll need employer support for this, and we'll be advertising and promoting that through December and January.
Very cool. But can't wait to learn more about that.
Yeah, and can't wait to publish some op-eds from you, Megan, on your work.
Yeah.
Get the word out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So huge thanks to Chuck and Megan for making the time to both prepare for this conversation as well as to facilitate it. Thanks both.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the Cyber Guild and for everybody who came today.
Yeah, thank you. And see you all again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
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 Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.